Kia ora, everyone. Sorry, I got distracted by something backstage and everything got awkward and quiet for a second. Kia ora koutou. Welcome back to our first breakout session here in the Soundings Theatre. We'll have 2 sessions in this session, like Russian nesting dolls. And our first one is called Experimenting on the Edge, Learnings and Failings. Allow me to introduce our panelists while I make them stand awkwardly behind me. Hello. First is Candice Cramer. Candice is the time-based media conservator at the Australian Centre for the Moving Image, ACME, in Naarm, Melbourne. She's a co-convener of the special interest group Electron at the Australian Institute for the Conservation of Cultural Materials and a board member of the artist-run agency Composite. Having worked in collections access and preservation for the past 10 years, she has a keen interest in innovative conservation methodologies. As a former colleague of hers, I can let you know that this is an understated way of saying that she performs absolute miracles on the reg to conserve the ephemeral and the previously uncollectible. Joining us on Zoom, on a big screen at the back, will be Indigo Holcombe-James, who has very helpfully reflected the themes of digital adaptation, reducing carbon emissions by being unable to fly here for the conference. She is ACME's strategic research lead, coordinating commissioning and conducting the market and visitor research that places audiences at the centre of the museum. Prior to joining ACME, Indigo was a research fellow at the ARC Centre of Excellence for Automated Decision-Making and Society at RMIT University, where her research focused on digital transformation and inequality in the cultural and creative institutions and industries. And finally, Lucie Paterson, the head of Experience, Digital and Insights at ACME. With 15 years of experience at leading cultural institutions, including the South Bank Centre in London and here at Te Papa, Lucie is at the forefront of change and innovation in the museum field. Her current work focuses on implementing strategic design approaches across the museum and progressing innovation and experimentation practice in the sector. Lucie is also an NDF board member, which makes her my boss. So therefore, please go absolutely wild for the best panel in the entire conference, Experimenting on the Edge.
Thank you so much, Jim. Kia ora koutou, and thank you for having us, NDF23. Because Indigo is moderating this from afar, I am doing a little kick-off just to let her know that we're ready to go. So over to you, Indigo.
Awesome. Thanks, Lucie. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Oh my goodness me. That was exciting. Finally, something of a scale to match my ego. I'll keep chatting while this is getting set up.
Can someone get a photo of that?
I'm homebound in Melbourne, and I'm so sad to not be with you all in Wellington. I forgot about a small but fairly significant, it turns out, step on Tuesday, and I'm now the proud owner of a moonboat and staying very close to my apartment. But I am extremely grateful to the Te Papa and NDF conference teams for wrangling all of the technology and enabling me to be here virtually and alongside my most excellent colleagues, Lucie and Candice. To get us started, I'd like to begin by acknowledging that I'm joining you all from the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations, and to pay my respects to elders past and present. I want to acknowledge that sovereignty over these lands was never ceded, and it always was and always will be Aboriginal land. I extend those same respects to the lands that you are all joining us on today as well. So as Jim mentioned, this panel is called Experimentation on the Edge, and we developed the proposal for this panel in response to the kind of seemingly endless launch and swift normalization of quite staggering leaps in technical interfaces and technologies. So in terms of artificial intelligence, in terms of automation and beyond. I don't think it's a surprising thing to say that these technologies are developing rapidly. The capabilities of ChatGPT-3, for example, released in late 2022, have swiftly been dwarfed by that of ChatGPT-4, which was launched just 6 months later. These technologies are being taken up widely by our visitors and by our staff, and of course by the creative practitioners that we work with. But what do they mean for our cultural organisations? And how can our sometimes slow-moving sector keep up? These are really big questions, and they're probably realistically beyond the confines of a 1-hour conversation. But when it came down to preparing for this conversation, we found that we were really most interested in our panel's subtitle, which is Learnings and Failures. So we're going to use our time together to present and demo some of our current experiments. We'll reflect on where we see real potential and outline our decision-making around the technologies that we're so far choosing not to invest in and why. Our focus today is really centred on considerations of audiences and access. We're focused on the impact and outcomes that these technologies and experiments have, rather than the deep technological stacks that underpin them. In terms of setup for this conversation, Lucie and Candice are going to begin by running us through a series of demos, and then we'll get into more of a discussion. We're really excited for this to be a conversation with the audience as well. So I can't see you, but I do have Slido open in front of me. So please do ask your questions as they occur to you, and we'll try and get through as many of them as possible. Lucie, I can't see slides, but could you please move to the next one for me? I'm going to presume that that has happened. Awesome, great. Before we get into the demos, though, we wanted to do a bit of ground clearing. And we thought ground clearing was an important thing to do because we want to acknowledge upfront that not all cultural organisations are working with the same set of stuff. And we think it's important to ground what we're talking about in the stuff that we come with. So for those of you who don't know us yet, ACMI is Australia's National Museum of Screen Culture. We're located in the heart of Melbourne's Federation Square, and our museum celebrates the wonder and power of the world's most democratic art form. And we work to foster the next generation of makers, players, and watchers. We deliver a vibrant year-round calendar of exhibitions, screenings, commissions, festivals, and industry and education programs that work to explore the stories, technologies, and artists that create our shared screen culture. In terms of who we are, who is doing the work that we're about to talk about, we're a medium-sized cultural organisation. We've got around 150 FTE staff. We're 70% government funded, with the remainder being self-generated. And where we might be a little bit unusual is in the size and scope of our digitally oriented teams. So we have a technology team, which is headed up by Jeff Williams, and where what we might think of as ICT typically sits. So the team is made up of 5 people that manage systems administration, network management, business applications, cybersecurity, the help desk, as well as all the fun procurement and technology governance bits and pieces. So that's where kind of ICT sits. And then we have the Experience, Digital and Insights team, which is where I work and which is led by Lucie, who's in the room with you. And the digital part of that team is especially important to the stories that we're about to tell. So the EDI team has got 3 developers, Simon, Ruby, and Sam, and they specialise in creative technology, software development, and work across cloud infrastructure to work with designers and audience engagement experts. They're managed by Francesco, who is our software and cloud services manager. And Fran's has got an ICT background, but really he's the glue between each of these teams. He works as the product manager for the development process and manages how we build these experiences out. So collectively, these people work across the museum to extend the XOS, the experience operating system that ACMI is based on, and the website that makes ACMI's experiences come to life. And they are critical in developing and delivering the experiments that we are going to talk through today. This team has been built up over many years, and we'll talk through that further. But its genesis really comes from the appointment of Seb Chan as our Chief Experience Officer in 2015. These teams also intersect across the museum. Multiple museum teams work with them, none the least of which is our collections team, which Candice will tell us about more soon. But all of this is really to just say and to put up front that this work takes digital capital. It requires time, it requires resources, money and expertise that in turn takes time to develop. And we know that not everyone is operating with the same kind of level playing field here. But nor do they necessarily need to. And one of the points of this conversation that we want to get to is the opportunities for sharing learnings and for exploring possibilities around distributed infrastructures and technologies, and we'll get to that later on. All right, so that's the ground clearing done. Let's get into the demo.
Thank you, Indigo. In my position as time-based media conservator, this role sits within our wider registration and collections team at ACME, and our collection is just shy of 77 years old. Formed as the State Film Centre in 1946, ACME's collection includes over 40,000 film titles, artworks and video games, as well as film and TV artefacts. In recent years, our focus has been on collaborative research projects to find innovative ways to both preserve the collection and provide access to it. Approximately 12% of our collection has been digitised, but we've only been able to publish 1,500 of these titles online, owing to copyright restrictions. Like many of you here, we're working hard to bolster these figures through targeted acquisitions, rights clearance, digitisation, and cataloguing for access.
Thanks, Candice. This is all really important context for what we have to experiment with. And we have been doing that experimentation since 2015, which doesn't sound like a long time in our lives in the history of museums, but as Indigo said, it has been such a fast-moving environment that we're in. A lot has happened in those 9 years. So in 2015, Seb set us the challenge of how might we search inside our collection videos for cataloguing and research purposes. How might we use emerging technologies to open up and identify what is inside our collections for discoverability and access? So in 2017, our then, this is meant to be a wee video. In 2017, our then Chief Technology Officer, Greg Turner, kicked it off and made an experimental interface, which you can see a still of here, for navigating video content by tags generated by computer vision tools. And then also, not too much further later, we used Google Video Intelligence for automated content detection by applying it to the museum collection of historic videos. And around that same time, we were also having some fun with video grep, and you would have seen these all over the internet, a tool that looks at video subtitles and selects all of the mentions of a word in them and then stitches them together. So then the next sort of set of experiments that we're going to show you is really brings us to the present day and the more recent work that we have been doing. So the work done since Seb became our CEO and director, the challenge now is much more important, much more, I guess, pressing, and it's really integral to our museum strategy.
So being a museum of screen culture, ACME's collection is predominantly moving image content, which means it's very time consuming to watch every single video in our collection to catalogue it. Therefore, some of our first experiments have been around audio to text transcriptions, made available in our collection search function to broaden access for our collection available online. Recent advancements and availability of machine learning tools has meant the work in this space is constantly evolving, as Lucie suggested. After almost 10 years of internal experimentation, we've implemented audio-to-text transcription using OpenAI Whisper to make 2,052 titles available with transcriptions for our online video collections. These are the titles that have been digitised, and we have permissions for you to view either online or on our premises in our Wi-Fi footprint. What this video shows is that visitors to our beta search to video collection page will experience. For example, searching the word solar takes visitors directly to the clip within the video and also allows visitors to experience when other titles have used the same word. So what have we learnt from this experimentation? 20% of our digitised video collection is actually silent, and Whisper AI tends to hallucinate, where there's a blank audio track echoing the words or sounds like you. which is not useful and is actually adding unwanted material. We've also learned that good results require using their larger model, which requires more memory than we had the infrastructure to handle. But now that OpenAI's API is available, we've seen vast improvements to these challenges.
So now that we have our dialogue discovery, the audio transcription search for videos with audible speech in them, but what about the rest of the collection of videos that don't have speech or any audio at all? Or thinking back to the early computer vision work, what about allowing users to find everything that has cat in them? So following advances in computer vision AI, the next prototyping was using computer vision for object and action classification of videos in our collection using Blip2. We tested different software because this processing, as Candice said, is really intense. And so Blip2 gave us the best kind of quality for the least amount of effort. So this clip from the website, you can see a user looking for hats in the collection and then a series of examples from different videos where a hat has been identified. We've heard from Candice how time-consuming this work is for staff, so we really see this as prototyping a path towards machine-augmented cataloguing of time-based media. Adding helpful filters to video searches and cataloguing films in our collection that don't have any audio. Automating where we can so that we can put staff onto more valuable work elsewhere. And like the UU, we definitely had some failures. It's very hard to get useful confidence out of the image caption tool. So, for example, Blip2 hallucinates frisbees, which is totally random, but I guess the kind of sphere of the hat, and can't seem to tell the difference between a cat and a possum, and also thinks that the Arts Centre Melbourne spire is the Eiffel Tower. So sometimes these things don't matter at all, but sometimes they will be really important that we get right. So while this went live, and is live now for you all to play it, at acme.net.au/videos, the next step, which is happening right now over in Melbourne, is to integrate this into our existing search, to normalise it with our staff and our audiences, and really see how our visitors use it and whether it's more useful or not than our regular Elasticsearch.
This year we were also fortunate to receive a Wikimedia Australia Partnerships Project grant to look at and enhance our collection metadata, amongst other things. In the project, we were able to work with Paul Duchesne to expand and enhance our collection creator data. So this is directors and for artists, for instance, and their works. In Paul's words, a major component of the residency was demonstrating how ACME and Wikidata connections could be leveraged to make data statements and media transfer fluidly between respective systems, this being ACME's data and Wikidata. Next, please. Here you can see a representation of Paul's findings in matching creator entries from Wikidata, that's the darker lines, and the upload of the metadata to our XOS, which is our museum operating system, in the lighter lines. This obviously shows an increase in data to our collection records, but also points to where automation is sampled and analysed before upload. We will continue to see where the flow of data between ACME's collection and Wikimedia Commons can coalesce to broaden access to both platforms throughout the period of the grant. The next piece of work with this is to make this public to our creators page on our website so that our audiences can make use of this new content and connections.
The recent development of large language models has created new things for us to leverage in terms of increasing discoverability and access of our collections. And one of these things, one of these formats are embeddings. As Simon and our team says in his labs post that you can all read at labs.acme.net.au, because embeddings are great at returning similar things, we wanted to explore how useful they might be at uncovering similar items in the ACME collection. It represents words as a list of numbers and a means to connect collection records in new ways. Using OpenAI's embeddings and vector database, we have published a collection works explorer that matches related works on our website. So here you can see a user looking through and choosing, Big Little Lies in a second. Having a refresh. Big Little Lies. And then seeing all of the works that relate to that title. You just use the show related at the bottom of each thumbnail, and then you can see things that are similar. So it worked first time for us, which was great, so no failures to report. No learnings in that way, but we will look at tweaking it so that we're sending OpenAI's API to see how much we can enhance the matching. So the next stage for us is to bring it into the museum building and make a kind of an interactive or an experience for our audiences to engage with the collection with.
Awesome. Thanks, Lucie and Candice, for taking us through our current experimentation. We're going to move into a bit more of a discussion now. As mentioned up top, I'm going to moderate this conversation from across the oceans, and I'm looking for opportunities to bring the audience into this as much as possible. So again, please do put questions into Slido, and there are a couple appearing there, which we'll get to shortly. To kick us off, though, we did identify a few big buckets that we wanted to chat through, and these are up on the slides in front of you. We're interested in thinking through together the opportunities, the risks, the challenges, and thinking through where we're not quite yet ready to make an investment and why. And finally, maybe the biggest question, and one that we'd love to chat with you about further, is around how do we keep up with these developments at a sector-wide level? Alrighty, question one for Lucie first. Can you talk us through where you see the opportunity for museums and cultural organisations in relationship to these technologies?
Yeah, I think Candice is going to cover a lot more in terms of specifics around the collection and the data and how the teams can be enhanced with this technology. But I'm really interested in how this technology can be leveraged for our audiences in gallery and online through interactivity, through experience design, and really how this kind of prototyping internally can really help us give more immersion and things to our audiences. So by doing this kind of work in-house, it means that other partners that come on board, other firms, digital agencies and experience design firms can leverage the work that we've done, and they're not starting from scratch, which is really important for us. We've had some interesting situations where companies just kind of get in touch with us just randomly because they know that we're interested in this work, because we're publishing on the Labs blog, and we're all speaking at these kinds of things. And a couple of months ago, someone just approached us with a Seb AI, and they had trained Seb's voice off some presentations from conferences on YouTube and scraped all of the what's on content from our website and created an audio guide for the exhibition. So that is using a technology we hadn't prototyped with yet. It means that we probably don't have to, but we can test their one with our one and then see which one's better for what we need. So I think that's really interesting, and we wouldn't have got to that point if we weren't kind of doing this experimentation. And then also another thing about kind of talking about all the work is that an example, Francesco and our team that Indigo mentioned just got back from Fantastic Futures, the AI Glam conference in Vancouver, and was so surprised that none of the other institutions were publishing their work live. So I think a lot of organisations aren't kind of getting it out to audiences quickly, and I think it's really important for us to remember the benefits of doing that for our audiences and why we're here, but also for what it can lead to in terms of these collaborations and partnerships.
Hey, Lucie, can I interrupt you there and ask you to talk a little bit more on what it takes internally to get this stuff live? Like, is there, just thinking through like the confidence of putting something out that might not be entirely perfect, like what's the recognition in-house around that?
I think we we definitely bring a kind of product development lens and audience-centred lens to it. So strategically, really trying to get something out as quick as we can. It's never going to be perfect. We also are very transparent about the technologies we've used, that it's in beta, that it might not be, working perfectly, and give a way for our visitors to give feedback so that we can improve. And I think that's just been something that Seb has always really pushed us on, that moment to getting live and making it shorter and shorter. So I think, it's definitely been an imperative for a long time now. Yeah.
Nice one, thank you. Candice, did you have anything to add here from a collections or access perspective?
I guess in terms of the sort of what Lucie was talking about for partnerships, I think there's some great imperatives for the collection to also look at partnerships, and I think the Wikidata project was a great example of that. And I think we'll just make more and more connections with our collection data from working with other institutions, whether that's through Wikimedia and Wikicommons or just directly with other organisations. I think there's opportunities to point to each other's data. So, can we leverage opportunities where content has been digitised in other collections? Can we point to other collections as opposed to replicating that sort of digitisation work over and over again? So I think there's huge advantages in partnering and collaborating in this space. I think another example with the Wikidata project is the opportunity to bolster representation for underrepresented people and groups in our collection. So I'm thinking of our First Nations collections, our women, non-binary and gender diverse people. How do we bolster sort of content in our collection by collaborating through the Wikidata project, for instance?
That's awesome, thank you. I'm just looking at the Slido, and there are a couple of questions coming through on there. One in particular riffing off the idea of the Arts Centre Eiffel Tower precedent, and asking if there's capacity for ACME to counter the Eurocentric training of AI models. I wonder if it's quite a big question, but I wonder, Candice, if you can talk a little bit more about the way that this expansion of cataloguing data can change how we think about our own collections, maybe.
Yeah, I guess it's an interesting sort of connection to draw. And that's, in part, that question is about sort of data training and how we sort of look at a more Australian perspective, which maybe Lucie can add to as well. But I think the new connections that can be drawn are different to our traditional cataloguing methods, which we also need to recognise. We use Library of Congress subject categories, very useful information, very rich descriptive data in our collection. So we're sort of using AI tools to enhance that and draw new relationships out. So I think that's a really sort of interesting space to do that. But in terms of training, Lucie, do you have sort of thoughts around that?
We have just started a very early conversation about how we might tag some of this work in our back-end system, and thinking about whether we do that internally with staff, and we kind of get a prompt each morning and we have to kind of jump in and identify some things, or we do another Wikipedia or Wikiathon and get people to come in and do that with us. So yeah, I think there's definitely ways that we can make it more Australian-centred.
Thank you. One thing that I think comes up really consistently in this field is the question of risk, right? And that is something that's coming up a lot in Slido already, which we will come to shortly. These risks might be questions of bias, of misinformation, of inaccuracies, of copyright, all of these things. I think rather than spending our time together detailing risk, I wanted to think through how we can mitigate against that risk. And one of the ways that we're doing that at ACME is through our Digital Innovation Steering Group. Lucie, I wondered if you could tell us a little bit more about what that group is and what it kind of does at this stage.
I think that's a great approach to take. Also, we've always been very encouraged at ACME, via Seb, to be really curious and inquire about these things and read a lot of stuff and go to things. And I think that's a really important sort of value or practice that we should all be kind of committing to. But yes, when it kind of ChatGPT3 and everything last year, I think it all kind of came to the surface much more, like for everyone, and it was much more available, and teams are, much more concerned about their roles and different things that were kind of coming out in the media about the risks. So we established a digital innovation steering group, and this group gives direction to this work that we do. It includes Candice's leader, so the head of collections registration, head of technology, Indigo, strategic research lead, myself, Seb, and our head of exhibitions. And we meet monthly. Initially it was just to mine Seb's brain so that we could kind of see where he was seeing the future of this and where he wanted us to focus, but it's actually become much more useful in terms of talking about the risks, about kind of thinking around policies, and just being able to have these conversations internally in a kind of safe environment. So I think, that's been a huge step forward for us.
Awesome. One of the questions that's come through on Slido is if there are any concerns around the use of shadow AI among staff. I wondered if you could speak to that a little bit, Lucie.
Sure. I think you probably mean staff using generative AI in their own work that might not be a work system or a work account, possibly.
Yeah, exactly.
So we're definitely encouraged to experiment with all of these tools in our work. Again, there's a lot of people in the technology teams who people can go to if they're not sure about something. But for example, our writers in different teams are using the one that's recently come out, the Australian Style Guide for SEO, web writing and accessible writing with ChatGPT. So that's, hugely efficient. In a lot of that work, a lot of teams are using it for image generation. We'll see some pretty imaginative slides at 4:30 from Seb and Indigo. So I think we're not concerned about that, and definitely there's an open space for experimentation at ACME.
Nice one, thank you. The other point around the Digital Innovation Steering Group is it's also an opportunity for us to keep across and to think about where those conversations are happening outside of ACME as well, right? So a big conversation at the moment has been around policy guidance for this kind of work. We've seen the New South Wales government just release a series of mandatory ethical principles for the use of AI, and it looks likely that Victoria will follow in the same footsteps in due course. And we're also really interested in how other organisations are talking about these things. So the Smithsonian's AI values statement has been particularly interesting, as has the Library of Congress's recently released artificial intelligence planning framework. So it's a really useful forum for thinking about these things collectively. Lucie, again, apologies to keep picking on you from up above and behind. Just wondering if you could talk a little bit further just on mitigating against risk and the way that we do that on a project-by-project basis. I know that you and Simon have really interesting conversations about that kind of decision-making.
Yeah, Simon is the creative technologist at work who is most interested and kind of driven and passionate about this work. And we have really interesting and kind of I learn a lot from him in terms of how he makes decisions around things ethically and what to use. And because we don't have, like we said earlier, a labelled data set to test the bias of a lot of these tools, Simon follows the links to the training set that the algorithms were based on, and then does a search for any research papers where he might be able to find out the bias of those sets. So he's definitely looking into that for everything we use. And then some of the kind of things that we're also kind of thinking around data security and privacy issues. There's obviously not any customer data that we need to be worried about. That's all, very separate and But in terms of the data that we're processing and publishing, there's nothing that we're kind of concerned about risk-wise with the processing, but the publishing of the data, we've already touched upon it in terms of spot checks and how we make sure that's all kind of ethically sound. And as Candice said, it's incredibly time-consuming.
Yeah,
Did you want to add anything to that, Candice?
Yeah, I guess just in terms, of risk, I think transparency of data and where the sort of machine and human coalesce that sort of information, there's a risk that that's not spelled out enough for our audiences. And what we've done at ACME is actually make that pretty transparent. So all of this AI testing is done in beta testing pages that people access through the beta pages. So it's very clear that it's all experimentation and AI-generated data as opposed to our traditional cataloguing data. So I think that's really important to articulate.
And that's even, it goes also into the more kind of in-gallery experiments or interactives that we have where we are using data that's processed in these ways where, it's on the label. Our recent lens design, I think I've got one in my pocket, has got some images that we generated from Midjourney, and that's all written up on our website. So just trying to give the user and audience kind of, as much information as we can.
Which kind of speaks to our role in this space, right? We're a museum of screen culture. The process underpinning these technologies are inherently of interest to us, our collection, and to our audiences. Looking back through Slido again, there are a few more questions around kind of logistics things that, Candice, you might have some thoughts on. One question from Anonymous is, the description of content by AI is quick. How much staff time is spent moderating and correcting that content?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Some of the reality is we can't moderate all of that content. We're talking about thousands of records and entries. So what we've done in between for the Wikidata project is upload that sort of data to our XOS, that's our museum operating system, and the next step will be to look into that and see how much should be moderated. I think there's always a risk, or one of the sort of biggest risks that maybe collections and archives are always juggling with is releasing all of that data that could be accessible to a lot of people and that could be really useful, versus the risk of, maybe a small percentage of records going out and being inaccurate. So how do we balance that sort of risk? Could we actually have robust takedown policies and work with our communities to see what that risk really looks like what's our risk appetite in this space?
Another comment on Slido is, for what it's worth, at the NFSA, we found that there wasn't an American or European model that can speak Australian. So we're building our own. Lucie, I know that ACME in particular has been a challenge for our models. Or, yes, can you speak about some of the training that we've done there?
Can you repeat the question, Indigo?
Yes, absolutely. I was just thinking about the example where we're programmatically changing or updating how ACME is referred to in some things, like ACKMEE.
Yeah, and I don't know how we actually went through and fixed that. But it wasn't picking up the organisation's name, which took a huge amount of... I wonder if Simon did like a find and replace. Can you do that? Yeah, I think so.
Spell it out, I think.
Yeah.
Me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Got to capture the Australian accent in there somehow. Thinking about challenges, Candice, I wondered if you can expand a little bit on the major challenges these technologies are presenting for your work at the moment.
I think we've been through quite a few of them, but as was suggested this morning, technology is in our hands. AI is a tool, so that tool needs intervention at every stage that it's used in a sustainable way. So, I guess we need to look at the implementation, the assessment, the development of these tools and what outcomes that they have. I guess we also need some cross-department collaboration, as we see in the steering group, technologies steering group. And I think in terms of priorities, we do need to, as I said, work with our communities to understand where inaccuracies and bias appears and how we can sort of mitigate some of those risks and work with our communities.
Similar topics are coming up in Slido. So, for example, one audience member is asking what the cultural permissions process for ensuring First Nations knowledge isn't undermined by using this technology. And kind of relatedly is thinking about the gaps in these technologies, and what about non-English words or unclear speech patterns or minority languages that we might be able to pick up. Gavin Summers is our Director of First Nations and Social Equity, and I know that he's thinking a lot about these questions at a broad museum level. Lucie or Candice, did you have anything to add to this conversation?
I might just say that the collection data is over 70 years old, so we're working with descriptive data that has embedded bias in it already. So, I think some of that sort of find and replace can actually benefit the collection. We're looking at derogatory language in the collection that's been used for our First Nations content and terminology. And I think, AI can be kind of really useful in this space. So I guess the data is only as good as, your original data anyway, and what are you enhancing? So I think we need to look at AI, but also our original data too.
I think it's a very, as we know, an evolving space. I don't really have anything to add apart from, having Gavin Summers, Director of First Nations Social Equity and Inclusion, has been a huge asset to the organisation to really be able to focus on that.
Awesome. All right, so we've covered some opportunities, some risks, and some challenges. We also wanted to include discussion about where we're not yet investing. One example of this might be Web3. Earlier in the year, 7 ACME staff participated in a 16-week course learning process that was called Web3 Arts and Culture. It was delivered by We Are Museums and TZ Connect with the support of Tezos and in collaboration with the Blockchain Art Directory. There were 7 of us from across the museum, and we were really trying to bring together multiple kind of different ways into thinking about blockchain technologies. So Lucie and I took part from the Experience Digital and Insights team. Simon, the creative technologist, who we've already talked a little bit about, was there as well as folks from our curatorial and public programming team. And we took part in the project because of all of the things that Lucie and Candice have already said, that kind of culture of wanting to understand and be equipped with digital literacies, to work with artists and creative practitioners who are working with cutting edge and emerging technologies. But by the end of the 16 weeks, we hadn't yet found a use for blockchain technology that would meaningfully enhance our visitor experience. And so we decided not to build anything during the prototyping part of that project. Largely because of that audience piece. It wasn't going to meaningfully serve our audiences at the time, or usurp existing technologies that we're using. But there are heaps of other examples of this kind of decision making, where Web3 was really around that audience expectations and desires piece. Some of our decisions in this space have instead been driven by things like infrastructure or ownership. Lucie, I wondered if you could talk us through some of these things from maybe even the 2010s.
Yes, so I think we all remember the 2010s and having millions of microsites for every exhibition, every festival, every year there was a new microsite, and designed by different agencies, hosted on different platforms. in different, just so hard to manage. I tried to look up a few of some exhibitions from my time in London at South Bank Centre, and the websites are nowhere to be found. They're not even on the Internet Archive, so all of that has been lost. So at ACME we've been really, really kind of clear around that and not wanting to repeat those same mistakes. And we've talked a little bit about the Experience Operating System, XOS, and making sure that all of these technologies and the things that we're building are built into this system, so that we're thinking about redundancy and anything that, when new updates to models or new things come in, we can evolve as we go. So that's, I guess, a philosophy in a way that we work. So that kind of goes across everything. It means some of the things we haven't tried for that reason. We tried a chatbot ages and ages ago. I can't even remember what the technology it was on, but it wasn't on our owned platforms, and we just felt like we didn't want to invest that way. It's also one of the reasons we never did an ACME app. We didn't kind of like the idea, first of all, from an audience perspective, about a kind of one-time visitor having to download an app to do anything with us, but also just being, stuck to that kind of technology and that hosting and infrastructure, and not kind of owning it. So there's all kinds of things that we weigh up across audience benefit, sustainability in terms of organisation, and then kind of strategy and where we're wanting to get to. So it's a constant balance.
Excellent. So I think we've got about 3 or 4 minutes left, and I'd like us to finish on that final question. How do we keep up? Candice, I wondered if you can speak a little bit to what this looks like from a collections perspective. How do we better make the time and space for developing these capabilities, and what should we be prioritising moving forward?
Yeah, I think it's literally what you said. It's like, how do we make that time? We literally just need to make that time to do testing, to have these cross-department collaborative conversations where each voice is being represented across our teams, so we understand how these tools are being used and for what purpose and to what ends. I think that's really important, and to be sustainable. So as you just articulated, Lucie, we've chosen not to have apps or things that don't appear to be sustainable. So I think that's really important to consider. And again, in terms of prioritising data, I think it's just time to try and understand how we can better represent underrepresented groups, so our First Nations, women, gender diverse groups, and how we can work better to make our data accurate and in a sustained way.
Awesome. Lucie, can you zoom us out a little bit and think about this from an organisation-wide perspective? What does it look like to kind of decentralise where the expertise lies?
Yeah, we've been doing a lot of work. We've got a new organisational strategy which puts innovation and experimentation really at the heart of the success of the museum. And for that to be successful and to be, actually manifested, we need to expand the innovation and kind of the skills of people and their capacity and openness to learn these things. So it can't just sit with the technology teams. And people also, I think, feel like we're kind of beating them with a stick a little bit when we're trying to kind of get them to take on new tools all the time. There's a bit of a tool fatigue. So we're really looking at how we can leverage other people in the organisation who are using these tools for their own purposes, either in their own creative lives or in their work lives, and running lunchtime sessions and really trying to kind of get some advocates throughout the organisation so that we can really expand the innovation throughout the organisation. Another thing we're doing soon is a skills audit across the organisation to really see where the gaps are, where our expertise really is, and how we can get everyone up to a more balanced kind of level of knowledge around all this stuff.
Awesome. That's us pretty much on time, I think. In the spirit of NDF, we wanted to close with an invitation to collaboration and conversation, which I am very sad to not be able to partake in directly, but please do go and accost Lucie and Candice at lunch or afternoon tea, which I think is what you're going into next. We don't think we all need to be doing the same work or reinventing the same wheel. There are opportunities to share code, to share infrastructure, to share learnings across sector, and we'd love to have conversations with others that might be wanting these outcomes and could use what we've done with them. Thank you very much for your time and smarts today, Lucie and Candice. Over to you to wrap up in the room.
Great. I don't think there's anything else to say apart from thank you, Indigo, from afar for keeping us on track and asking great questions. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Candice. Thank you so much, Lucie.